Okay, so everybody, we are recording this meeting. I guess we can go ahead and start here because Paul should be on momentarily and hopefully Bob will be as well. So this is just a recap what we heard last week from the ski company. Start polling some board members to see at the end of this where we want to go with this, but trying to get some ideas about how we move forward, how we strategize, and what's everyone's perception of how the meeting went last week. Anyone want to start?
As you and I spoke, um, they're over the allowable square footage, and they're going to have to amend the PUD. And it appears to me that they're just trying to build too big of a building for the space they have.
Are you saying, meaning, just so I understand your opinion, meaning that do you feel like too big that it wouldn't get, are you worried that it would get approved or any
Well,
concerns?
they're allowed up to 25%, right?
Right.
And they're at apparently there's some discussion if it's 35% or 38%. And
Mhm.
the city typically is very strict on allowing us to do anything, for example, build a house larger than 6,000 feet. So in this case, they're asking the city to allow a substantially larger building than would be allowed normally. So we end up with off of the ditch trail a 10-foot wall that's along the trail. So, if they were within the 25%, it'd probably be 2-story rather than 3-story.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think I find it super concerning because it seems that the village will be able to make a decision on the PUD versus it feels different, and I love Corey's perspective than the Krablunic thing, in that the village had an agreement with us, and in this case, the agreement is between Skico and the village, of which we just become bystanders. In other words, neighbors that can
Exactly.
complain. So to me, it feels, kind of concerning, because I can't imagine. I personally understand the very direct impact it will have on traffic flow versus how it is today. I can look at numbers daily and see how many park down there and how many the difference. And so I know it would be a huge difference. It also would be a huge difference in neighbors um, that are there, and why we all bought here. And it feels, what I don't understand, and therefore don't love the lack of feeling of control, is that the village, it feels, could perhaps say, well, great, that solves some of the housing problem, so let them do it, and we're going to pass that because our goal is to get more employee housing. And this isn't, although Aspen Ski Co. isn't their employees, it's still employees of the valley. So it feels like they could try to push it through, and I don't know if we have legal to stand on. So that's what I'm excited to understand more about, and I feel like it's super important to see how we minimize or stop it from its original intent.
Yeah, that I don't
There's my
know.
opinion.
And I'm not sure if when they go in for a change, how successful they have been in the past.
Mhm.
In other words, when they're restricted to certain coverage and then ask for a change, has that been approved most of the time, or it just depends on the specific project? But at least it's, as you pointed out, we don't, on the Kabloonik, we have an agreement. On this one, it's their property. And the best we can do is complain or say we don't like it, which probably doesn't carry too much weight. But that's the only place I could see that we had something to say that, geez, you had this PUD originally for 25%. Now you're asking for 35 or 38%. And we already discussed the impact on the trail or the size of the building and the amount of employees that are going to be there. Now, one thing they haven't come back to us was how many employees would be housed there that actually drive up every day. In other words, we were saying, well, maybe this might actually cut down on some of the traffic if you're going to house people that are driving up and down Divide Road every day that don't have to drive up there because they're staying there, even though they're going to go to the store, they're going to go downtown, so we're not sure what that number is because we asked for that specifically, what traffic could it save for us?
Okay, let me call him. I'll
Right,
ask.
my viewpoint on that is that right now in the middle of the winter, we don't see people going up and down very much because they go at 5:30 in the morning. And
Right.
then I would tell you that besides Krabloonik, like maybe there's 8 other cars. I mean, it's not like a full lot or anything. And so to their point, which he disclosed, is many of them get on the mountain at another place and
Yeah, well,
end up
that's
working
the
out of there.
question.
So that
Yeah,
was very clear to me why we don't see many cars up there. So I think it's all additive, no question to me. It's just a matter of what we get to actually affect.
Yeah, well, like I said, we don't have a lot to hang our hat on, as you will, because we're not really in agreement. The SKICO's ability to do that is with them and the town and not us. We can complain and jump up and down, but that's about the extent of what we can do other than say, hey, this is not what the original PUD and we're not in favor of it. And it sounded like to me that they were really concerned that we would help them get that change in the PUD.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that because I think Corey and Paul need to tell us every legal route there is.
Yeah, I'm trying to get Paul on the line. So while I'm doing that, Corey, can you give us your legal perspective on that?
No, well, Christine, you're right. It is different from the Krabloonik lot because we have a separate contractual agreement with the town regarding the Krabloonik lot that is above and beyond the PUD. But beyond that, they really are the same process.
Okay.
The developer, in this case, it would be SKICO, makes an application to amend the PUD. There's a series of hearings, public hearings, where they'll take testimony and have discussions about it. The public will have an opportunity to speak, and at each phase of the process. Now, I will say I have in the past successfully helped a person in Basalt prevent an RV park from going in on property just north of the Basalt Public Library. You might know where that is. And we did it. We did a letter writing campaign to all the town council members. We had some environmental stuff that we presented because it was right along the river. There were reasons why that wasn't a good site for the development they were proposing, and it ultimately got voted down. The big hurdle that you have to get over here is it's affordable housing. And that is such a political hot button throughout the valley, certainly in Snowmass Village. And so in order to overcome that, we're going to have to present the town council with compelling reasons why they shouldn't be allowed to build at the scale they're building. And it's probably it's a part of it. They will take seriously the change in the nature of the community that you all bought into. Now, they can't just push that aside, but it's going to take more than that. If it was just SKICO wanting to put up a for-profit structure up there, if they wanted to put a hotel in or condos or some other profit-making large scale venture, that would probably be pretty easy to defeat. But there is a political tailwind that's going to help them push the affordable housing issue through.
Right.
Um, and it's political. I mean, it really is at this time. I think strategically, the other thing that you need to keep in mind throughout this process is one of the criteria that the town council is going to have to look at is how does the proposed change impact or vary from the current nature of the community that's being proposed in. And right now, it's a major change. But let's say they succeed in getting this or 75% of what they want put in there. When it comes to Krabloonik or some of the other lots that the town owns up there, the parking lots, then the nature of the community has changed. It's already denser than it was. You don't have the same argument anymore that you're drastically changing the environment. They will already have a dense development up there. It makes it easier for the town council to approve the next development in the area that wants to do something similar. And I think Paul just joined us, and one of the things he talked about at the end of that call last week or whenever we had that was a global approach. And maybe it would be worthwhile to just present to the town when this first comes up. Hey, we know this, we're only talking about SKICO's proposal right now, but there's a whole lot more going on up there. And I think we need to take this into consideration in its totality, that we're not just talking about the SKICO project, that we need to be thinking down the road and try and push for some sort of global resolution that limits the development for all the area up there.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, there's not much you can do to get it set in stone, right? I mean, these PUDs are as close as you can get to that for the most part. And so regardless of what they end up doing, that doesn't mean that 15 years from now, they couldn't start the conversation again. It's a political animal, and it always will be.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was just trying to minimize how many people would go up there. They're more than likely they're going to be able to put in employee housing. I mean, that was set aside for it. I think they only wanted to have 2 or 3. I forgot what the actual numbers were. I think the total number was like 11. They already have 6 or 7 or 8 at the other facility.
Mhm.
It's a different animal, as you said, that we don't really have a lot to legal standing because we don't have an agreement with them. It's between them and the town. So it just seems when they started talking about having a building that rises 10 feet above the level of the ditch trail, it seems like that's to me that it's out of scale to where they wanted to build it. It might be well, anyway, that was the point I was trying to bring up, that we at least had something to basically complain about and say, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right. It's just out of scale.
Since it hasn't been brought up, I'm going to assume this doesn't exist. I know various trails around the valley get closed during elk breeding season and elk migrating season. Is there any chance the ditch trail is one of those?
No.
No.
Open year round.
If there is any kind of environmental reason why such a large, densely populated structure shouldn't be built, I don't know if that exists, but that would be a stronger position to be able to take if it did, but it doesn't sound like you would have that.
Yeah, I don't think that's true in this case.
Yeah, this is Paul. I'm in the meeting, but I think because I joined the other meeting, Bill had said my video isn't working. But I'll see if I can get it to be
Yeah,
working.
you just have to start over, usually turn off the other one and then,
Yeah, I don't want to do that because I miss so much of this meeting, but it really, when I think about it, to have a city apartment building in the middle of the wilderness, there's something that doesn't seem right about that because it seems to me that what they really have there, they're proposing to put up is a city apartment building.
yeah, I makes sense. Margaret or Stephanie, haven't heard from you. Tom, John, thoughts?
I've got Dutch on my phone, and so he's now just listening. He can't get in, but I'll have Bob. If you have anything you want to say, you want to let me know, or just start talking, and I'll see if I can get it in the microphone.
I don't think she had a good response to the safety issues
Well,
with that 10-foot
Hold on.
retaining
Yeah.
wall. Oh, sorry.
You go ahead.
Bill, can you go on mute, Bill, so we can hear Stephanie?
Yes.
I don't think she had a good response to our concerns on safety when Christine brought up people with their walking their dogs. You've got children on the ditch trail and animals, and they have that 10-foot retaining wall. She's like, oh, maybe we could put up a net or something. I mean, they would have to put up a big fence, and that again impacts the environment in a negative way. They have to do something. You can't just have that drop off. It's so close to the ditch trail. It's like 10 feet, isn't it?
Yeah, 20.
Super close. It's the first thing
20
you'd
feet,
see.
but it's close. You've got a lot of families, and I don't know. I think there's a safety issue.
Margaret?
Well, I pretty much agreed with what everyone has said. I do agree that we should take a global position against it, just so that precedence isn't set for further development. You can't mitigate noise, you can't mitigate traffic. Bert and I bought there in the neighborhood for the solitude and the serenity. I was looking forward to not hearing the dogs twice a day or, and seeing the wildlife come back to the area in a more generous way. I definitely am curious. Has anybody thought about how this affects people in Wildcat? There are a few homes right above the road. Is it worth some time to investigate whether or not they would be interested, or those homeowners would be interested in jumping on board? I also think that it's not cohesive with what the town has planned for their affordable housing. And I guess they have designated 3 areas that I think are closer to natural commerce areas already developed. They want to put their affordable housing by the center, I think by the mall, and then somewhere closer to Two Creeks. So I don't know how she had talked about town character. I don't know how that jives with what the town says about their own affordable housing. Those are sort of, and when I drive down up Divide Road and I look for that brief moment where I can see daily, and just trees on either side of the road, I think, well, that's my Maroon Bells. That's my private one way. I know it's not, but that's how I feel about that view and preserving the sanctity of that area. That's that may not mean everything to everyone here, but that's my reasons for not agreeing with 30 units, that we can't control who's going to be living in these units and who's going to be subletting their units, as these are seasonal people. There's a potential for a balloon, I think, of traffic and unknowns. I do know that I had mentioned to Deidre at one time that the Snowmass Club was declined their changes for adding affordable housing in courts. but one of the neighborhoods had started with a petition. I don't know if that's something we should consider prior to or in conjunction with the SKICO's presentation at town council meetings.
Great points, Margaret. Tom?
Hold on.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I'll get you in a minute.
So the other thing that I think hasn't been discussed is this sort of, in my opinion, disingenuous way that the whole presentation is being portrayed. I mean, when the PUD was originally, created, there was like 2,200 square feet for employee housing. And then when it was modified in 2001 and 2002, it went up to 6,400. Based on the county assessor's records, there's currently 8 bedrooms and 6 baths for a total of 7,309 square feet. So I don't know the facts, we should know the facts, but it seems to me like their phase 1 and their phase 2 of employee housing has already been built. Maybe not with complete approval. I don't know, but this presentation that sort of says, well, there's a phase 2 left over, and then, oh, by the way, we're really going to add another 14,000 or whatever the number is to, it just seems like they're just trying to pull a fast one on everybody, and they're not being truthful about all the different things, even on the height. I mean, the height was modified from 35 feet to 43 feet for the 6 units that are currently there, for a specific reason, and it was sort of a quid pro quo for something else, and it's all spelled out. Corey had it in his letter. And then it just sort of like, oh, and by the way, we're gonna go 43 feet. Well, I think that requires a variance.
Mm-hmm.
And that extra 10 feet that we're talking about sticking up above the ditch trail, I mean, it would be a whole lot less impactful in my view if it was only 35 feet. Probably, as Art said, would be a 2-story building instead of a 3-story building. So there's just a lot of sort of sleight of hand and sort of, look the other way. And, I think we could really push back on that in a way that, highlights it and highlights the unfairness of it. So,
Tom, I totally agree. And I think that's like why my dander went up, when I feel like people are trying to make it sound like they're not doing anything that shouldn't be. And the whole thing around, again, a lot of us don't live here full time. And those of us that do, like the traffic numbers they threw out, the number of people that come in and out of there, it's all full of holes. And it clearly is a story that they're hoping nobody catches. So to your point, there's probably dozens of those, which are kind of nauseating because it means that they are trying to pull a fast one versus, and again, maybe I would if I was them, I don't know, but it shouldn't, that many things shouldn't get varianced and be slid under the rug. I also think that this piece around, and again, Corey and Paul, we're going to just need opinions on how to approach this. I think there's a couple of things in my mind. One is our whole neighborhood does have to know. I know of plenty of people that would want to know this, would want to be a part of it to the extent they should be, or at least have a voice. So I think we owe that to the owners in a way that is appropriate. I don't know the right way to do that. But I think there's way too many people that this affects, and it can affect a lot of the value of their home. So they should know and be given a forum for some, like a Zoom for people to talk if they need it. Perhaps with Corey and Paul giving legal responses, and doesn't need to be the board. And then I think the other is there's all these people, Margaret, you talked about, be a Wildcat, Eisner, Helm sitting down at the bottom, the noise of the dogs is going to be less than the noise of 39 new cars and all the people. Because it'll be more than twice a day, and we all hear that, and it travels. So it's going to travel down that whole old Snowmass
Right.
corridor. And sitting right at the bottom is Mr. Helms and Mr. Eisner's peaceful home, who have plenty of money to throw at this if they decide as well.
Paul?
Should I let Bob try to say something on my cell phone?
Sure.
No way. We don't want to hear from Bob.
Bob, let's see if we can make this work. I'll put you near my microphone. Go ahead. Can you hear him?
I guess my take on it is politically, what can we get away with? I mean, obviously, if we could have our way, we'd just say no to the town, no to the area, and be done. But my fear is
Can't hear.
Bob, we can't hear
We
you.
lost you.
Try to speak a little louder.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. What I wonder is, what are our odds of being able to defeat them with the town? Because the town, I mean, I could see the town granting an approval just to spite us, because they wanted to put into housing and we said no. And so realistically, do we even have a chance to beat them at this?
Corey or Paul, you want to respond?
I
Well,
think you have this Paul. I don't know if you can see me. I think my
We can
camera.
see you, Paul. We get to
Yeah,
see you
see
now.
you.
And I apologize for the confusion at the beginning, but I think you have to make your case, really. I don't think, it's, I think you have to emphasize what the impacts are going to be. And they seem to be somewhat cavalier about it. I mean, like Corey was saying before he showed up, I think this is a political issue. I think that employee housing is an important issue, but there are ramifications. I mean, my sense of it with a project like this is they're going to come in asking for a lot, and then they expect it to be whittled down a little bit. So, I think the argument is made better by professionals other than lawyers, homeowners. If you can get somebody that has a professional opinion that this is going to be impactful, either a road engineer or a planner of some kind, or somebody that has an architectural background that may be within the group of people that are going to be impacted here in the neighborhood, that I think their voices would be heard a lot louder. Rather than lawyers, because I think the art of these things is put the lawyers in the background initially, and then see if people can make a good faith argument as to why this isn't the absolute right solution. And to me, I think this is what they propose is somewhat primitive. It's again, it's an apartment building in the wilderness. It just doesn't seem right after I thought about it after the meeting. Corey?
I can't think of other employee housing that has no public transport. And so then that opens up a whole nother question. Corey, sorry I interrupted that.
No, I think Paul's right. And my guess is the key to winning this type of political fight is to get out in front of it and, as much as you can, control the narrative. This is about a dense urban style structure being put out in the middle of pristine wilderness where it doesn't belong. This isn't about affordable housing. This is about protecting what we have from development, just in general, and maintaining the nature that is there. I think you have to fight it on multiple tiers, and that's one of them, the court of public opinion. And you've got to control that. And you can't let this become, these rich people don't want affordable housing in their backyard. It can't go there. And the only way to keep it from going there is to be very active and be out in front of it. And then the other thing you have to do is legally throughout the entire process, make sure they're crossing their T's and they're dotting their I's and they're, call them out on every misrepresentation that they make to the town council. Watch all the procedural steps, make sure that they're doing that right, and challenge them when they don't or if they don't. And you can do that depending on what they do. I mean, maybe they will follow the law all the way through, but I think these things are rarely perfect, and there are often opportunities to challenge them in the courts during the process. Without getting off in the weeds of the details, look at the fight that Lift 1A has been in Aspen for the last 10 years. If people stay organized and stay on top of it, you can change the course of these things. It's not a foregone conclusion that what SKICO's proposing is what's going to be built there. But you have to be proactive. I think reaching out to the Wildcat folks is something you absolutely have to do. The more opposition you have, the stronger you're going to be. To the extent there are any environmental groups or wildlife groups or conservation groups that might be, aligned with you, trying to make those connections would be helpful. A letter from a local wildlife group saying this city apartment building out in the forest is nonsense and it shouldn't happen. Those are the kind of things that help sway town council votes.
Do we need to come up with a concerted point of view to present to our neighborhood? Do we have to have a vote that this is the tone that we are going to take as a neighborhood before we start forming our political action group? How do we proceed along that standpoint? Because we're just, we're the board members, but I'm not sure that everybody's on board, especially when we're talking about retaining attorneys and getting advice.
One thing too, it's just not our community.
Right.
My impression is a lot of people use the ditch trail. So here you park, you get out of your car, you walk a couple hundred yards, and here's this apartment building stuck right next to it that has all the other issues that we've spoken about. That I'm sure most people would not be too pleased to have a building like that next to a wilderness trail.
Well, and the bicyclists that come up and
There's
down that
another one.
road. I mean,
Yep.
Yeah, I was thinking, Art, the ditch trail probably gets 50 cars a day in the
Least.
usable season, if not more. And so it's a huge community jewel, to your point. But Margaret, if we go back to your point, Corey, Paul, I do think like one of the first things at hand is that all of the homeowners don't hear about this by something in the paper or from someone else. And, what is the approach? Is it HOA divide is, speaking, or is it the 28 homeowners who agree to speak separately than the HOA? I mean, there's,
right.
those who don't agree don't have to be involved as far as I'm concerned, and the rest of us can. But I also don't know what the right way to approach that and do it properly is. So no feathers get ruffled, but more importantly, everybody can be involved and have a voice.
Well, a thought came to mind on that is, I think that the meeting with the SKICO rep, Heather, was recorded. So I think you could make that available to the owners and then perhaps schedule a meeting and say the board's going to discuss this. Please review this video to the extent that you have time to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to have a conversation about it as to what the appropriate procedure should be, and we invite you to attend if you have the time.
That seems great, Paul. What's everybody think of that?
It's a good idea.
Yep, I agree.
As an overall thought, just for you all, anything you put in writing might end up in the newspaper, might end up in a courtroom, it might end up before town council. And I think I would start forming a habit of, instead of calling it Skiko's Affordable Housing Project, you call it Skiko's High Density Apartment Building, or, something.
In the beautiful forest.
Yeah, just, and when you're talking about it, I mean, you just
Okay,
start, like I say, you start forming the narrative now.
yep.
And they're going to call it affordable housing, and they're trying to save the valley. Yeah, we're saying, no, this is urban development. You're trying to rule in the forest. And, which of those wins at the town council level, I don't know. But to give yourself the best chance you can, you just don't, NIMBYs don't do well. They don't do well in the press. They don't do well before town councils. And so you've got to make a presentation that this isn't about not having it in my backyard. This is about an inappropriate proposal.
Is it potentially a fire hazard? Bill, you might.
I think
Is it
he's
in the
on the
white,
call.
would that be in the white, like urban development, high density urban development in the White National Forest / ditch trail? I mean, I'm just trying to think of the exact words, so all our headings say the same and all our words flow the same. Anybody, is that wrong or right? I'm just curious, so like Deidre could label the invitation that.
Hey, Christine, would you give me that again, please?
I said high density urban development in our White National Forest / ditch trail.
It's pretty long. We can make that shorter.
Go for it, Margaret.
The bill here, getting back
High
to Paul,
density ditch trail.
getting back to Paul, the fire department has already seen these things and is told some issues they have, but they don't get involved in that kind of stuff. They just say, yeah, they can take care of it, and they have to have certain mitigation for certain things that they've seen. But other than that, the fire department just, deals with what they see.
Well, I know when they had the forest fire on the other side of the hill, there was a concern based on the way the wind was blowing that the whole town of Snowmass could have been put on fire. And that's what made me think of it.
Thank you for thinking of it, Paul.
I've got pictures from that fire, but no, it wasn't, I was down there putting it out with Dan McKeechin at the bottom, but yeah.
But there was never,
But
that was
Bill,
that.
I mean, it doesn't mean it's not a fire hazard. It doesn't mean the fire trucks can come up there, but it doesn't mean it's not an additional fire hazard in the middle of the woods.
Right. And they'll just have to, build it with fire mitigation involved, most likely, but no, that shouldn't be a big deal from the fire department side, but I'll let it go. I'll mute myself.
But yeah, but as a story for the town, that makes sense. What is the process on next steps of, like you said, Corey, you used the word getting ahead of it, which makes all the sense in the world. One is with the homeowners, and we talked about how to do that. What else does that mean that, we can all be doing, and how should we divide and conquer that? Or do you or Paul put together a letter of, a recommended action plan, and we all divide and conquer, this kind of thing? Or Deidre, your thoughts?
Well, I think, I think it's wise. The first thing is to set this Zoom call up, send the recording out, give people a week or so to, look at it, absorb it, get their thoughts and questions together, have that Zoom meeting. But then I would agree that I think we very need to quickly conquer and divide and figure out how we get our message out, start contacting Wildcat, contact the Helms, contact Eisner, contact anyone we can, and start formulating a plan on providing input, because I think, quite frankly, if I heard Heather Henry correctly, they're looking at going into sketch here within the next month.
Right. How do we again, I brought that up the last time, is how do we get ahead of their schedule? How do we know what their schedule is with the town and, being able to participate in those meetings?
And
If
being
they
prepared
are,
to do, and being prepared to do so, right, Margaret?
yeah,
All of these,
right.
here's what we should say, here's what we shouldn't, all these good ideas.
And here, and before we go any further with this, John Nolan, are you still on Zoom?
Yeah, can you not see me or
Yeah,
hear
so
me?
guys, this is John Nolan. He's the owner of lot number 4. He is truly the one who will be most affected by this. His property sits right above where this building's going to be. John is also a land developer. He and I have been speaking, and I think he's had some good thoughts and ideas. John, if you'd like to share those.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I don't know if I've met everyone. I met some, but it's been great hearing the comments. In the interest of time, I probably would jump right to Corey's comments. The political winds everywhere across this country, and everybody knows this, um, are such that, it's an uphill battle if you're just going to go in and say, we don't want that. Obviously, we've all kind of agree on that front. That said, this is an enormous approval process, a PUD major modification, as witnessed by all the things they're going to have to go through. I'd be interested to see what they need to change in terms of their governing documents to accommodate and give them the relief they'll need. Particularly when it comes to a comprehensive plan. I don't know, Corey, I'd be interested in your view, but that's not just a fine point pencil. That's a paintbrush that can have impacts elsewhere. I don't know all the things. I haven't dug in deeply, and I'm not by any stretch the expert on those things, but just trying to get some sense of, and we'll know this from some of the staff, I assume, and their reports, the approvals that they're going to need, just so we understand what the process is. I do believe they're going to move quickly. If it were me, I would move really quickly.
Sure.
Also think that they've been in the town. I mean, I don't think this is their first time sort of, hey, this is the first thing we're just thinking about this. I think they've been talking to staff. I think they've got everybody pretty much addressing all the things. Of course, they'll have to go through a lot of public hearings. But in terms of the idea of getting out in front of it, I couldn't emphasize that. I totally agree with that. And that's not as easy to do when these guys are moving quickly. I just would probably just jump to sort of the next steps if in terms of trying to be productive here. So my view on the politics is I don't know where it would come out. I totally agree the environmental uh, issues, the trail people impacts, a petition for the trail people, any and all of those ideas, every single one of those helps. Frankly, even yours, Margaret, you're not the only one that probably is looking at that view when you're coming up. And, again, those are more emotional than practical. But what I know with just looking at this thing, it's got to be violating so many of Snowmass Village's governing documents. In the core of urban planning, it basically would disagree with this in every way possible. So putting those arguments forward will be great. And, I just don't know how effective. Maybe you sound like Abraham Lincoln, and probably still wouldn't maybe be compelling enough. But so that's the one thought I have on that. I would be very interested on the legal side, though. And I have a question for Corey procedurally. If we're trying to
Okay.
be a pain in the ass and they go through this process and we see they're not crossing their T's and they're not dotting their I's, do we just simply raise the legal issues and let them trip over those? And with the idea that maybe you come back and you're just such a pain in the ass by a valid appeal. That's just one question I had on the legal side. But I would be very interested to understand sort of what the legal issues are. I noticed there was an easement, for instance. I have no idea what rights or laws there are around modifying an easement. I guess it's the town's easement, but what rights would the HOA have? in that kind of a future, just kind of exploring those kinds of things. And then the last thing that just sort of occurred to me, it just left me. Sorry, guys. Oh, the looking at the lot configuration, Tom mentioned this sort of notion of the unfairness. I mean, anybody that did their due diligence on buying their house in the divide looked at that, they would have said, hey, that's a PUD, that's pretty good. Of course, things can change, but that's a PUD. I feel pretty good about that. My interest would be understanding, and what's been helpful in the past when I've been involved in zoning things is going back to the derivation of this. I mean, just looking at, I forget the lot number of the HOA, the way it goes around and squeals here and moves there, it looks very strategic to me without even knowing about it. And I suspect there was a gargantuous amount of conversation, as I know there would have been, around the divide when this first PUD was put in place. And what are the comments that were made? I mean, did the ski co say, no, we just want to put 6. We'll never put more up. Did they say that in a public hearing? I mean, I don't know, but so Corey, maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well. So that's my sort of blah of everything. But I like the idea of trying to two-prong. One, what are the things we can generate a list of all the things that we would want to mitigate the impacts? Maybe we shrink the size. Maybe we put up a sound fence with significant landscaping. Maybe we say no outdoor cooking. Maybe it's, families, or, I mean, I don't know all of the conditions that we would put into this approval, but knowing what we want would be helpful because we'll want to ask that of the town.
And John, remember we talked about this before. I've thought about okay, all the things that would matter. Remember Margaret and Stephanie bringing some things up, last meeting. And then there's that fine line of that Tom had brought up before, which is, you start talking about as if you're going to give in to the original PUD, which was, let's say, if there is an additional phase that they're allowed, it sounds like we're not even sure that's it's 4 or 5 more. So, we will approve the already approved, PUD kind of thing. So I don't know if we start pulling together what we would agree to that's outside of the PUD, do we, disclose something we don't want to, or, Paul and Corey, what's your thought on that?
I think John's idea is pretty good, as a back, see what you can do to make it a little bit more palatable on the backside, just as a safety net. But again, I emphasize, I think you have more credibility, you get further ahead if you have somebody who has a professional background in what you're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
An urban planner, or somebody or an architect, somebody who sees the project a little bit differently. I mean, I've been in so many meetings on architectural review. Tom knows this because he was in the meetings with me, is where an architect presents something, but they have a really nice way of persuading people. It depends on perspective and point of view and so forth. And sometimes lay people who don't do this regularly, they don't really see what an architect sees. So I don't know who the right person would be for that. But there may be somebody in the community. And while I got the floor here, in connection with Krablunik, we sent a letter to the town requesting that we be notified of all meetings in which Krablunik would be discussed. So I would think that at the appropriate time, another letter should go informing the association of every meeting that's going to take place with regard to this project.
Great idea.
John, with regard to your question about how can we take steps legally to challenge mistakes made, for the most part, you can't do it until a decision has been made, the town council has made a decision, and then there's a rule of procedure called Rule 106 for challenging a decision of like a town council. And you have to file your challenge to that. I believe it's within 28 days. Don't hold me to that. It's not something I do every day. But there's a very tight, I do know it's a very tight turnaround time in which you have to challenge an administrative ruling like that or a decision, or else you've waived it. And so we would want to stay on top of that and be prepared to challenge it if needed. So that's one of the ways you can look at it legally. The other way is letter campaigns. You can send them to the individual town council members. You just say, you have an attorney, or even you can write them yourself. I've been made aware that this is what's being proposed by SKICO. I'd like to point out to the town, like I did in my letter to Tom that I think he shared with the board, hey, there are these 7 or 8 problems with what they're presenting, and it's not accurate, and you need to be aware of this. And this is a problem. And they'll read it for the most part and understand it. And you just have to keep doing that. But again, you can also, there'll be opportunities for people to testify and speak at those meetings. And if there's somebody in your community that is a land planner or an architect or an engineer who can show up and say, I live in the area, this is what I do for a living, this is what's wrong with that project, that's going to carry more weight than potentially a letter even from an attorney like me. They know we're paid to say what we're saying. But if you're a concerned citizen with some expertise making that argument, you're going to have greater credibility. You can also, you will see coalitions formed, groups, Friends of the Ditch. It can just be called the Friends of the Ditch Trail, and they can get together and hire an attorney, hire a land planner, hire an architect to put together letters and testimony for the hearings. With the resources that you all have available, and with Wildcat next door, there might be opportunities to put together some coalitions there that it's not going to, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. These things aren't inexpensive. And they can run the gamut from writing a 2-page letter to hiring a PR firm to help control the narrative. And, you can spend $5,000 to a couple $100,000 on a campaign like that. But if you have enough people involved and the impacts are grave enough, that kind of campaign can be justified. I'm not in a position to make those decisions for you or anybody up there, but I can help point out what resources are out there and how other folks have done it, and then you all can decide on where you want to go. I certainly think trying to create a coalition, especially if you can get broad support that's not just the next door neighbors, that's not just the divide, that includes other developments, other organizations, that you're going to have a better chance of succeeding at limiting this. But that's people on the ground, people that live there, knocking on doors, grabbing coffee with your neighbor and saying, hey, this is what's going on. We're putting this group together. Would you like to get involved? That's a lot of it, really. John, did you have, it seemed like you may have had another question. I don't know if I answered it, but I can't remember what it might have been.
Just understanding, and maybe it was just, I'm so curious about the lot configuration down there and the way it kind of cuts halfway into Treblunic, and it buffers ourselves from the SKICO, and it just feels like there had to be a ton of negotiation around that.
Well, I'm sure there was, and there are, like you say, recorded easements and other other restrictions that were put into place. The PUD is one, the amended PUD is another. Just generally speaking, easements, for the most part, you don't want to say anything in the law too absolutely because nothing is absolute in the law, but easements generally last forever and they can only be changed if they're abandoned completely or if both all the owners that are impacted by that easement and are party to that agreement agree in writing to change it. You have to have privity. There has to be some way in which you touch that easement. Either you're the property that's burdened by it or benefited by it. The easements between SKICO and the town or the Cumberland lot owner, you don't have privity there. So you couldn't change that without their agreement. They would have to do that.
Hey, Deidre, on the three-ring binder for the divide, who presented the application?
For what?
That represented the Perlmutter group, who's still around. You could talk to him. But didn't they have a land planner that was a design workshop?
I think it was design workshop, but as far as those who were in the land company, like Kenny Sontime, he's no longer around. Jim Wells is deceased. And then you've got Gene Golub and Norman Perlmutter right there at the top.
So Norman, I don't know about Gene, but Norman's still available.
Norman sold his property.
No, he did, but I mean, he would know who was involved, who planned it. In response to John's question.
I mean, I could go back and look through my documentation, see if I've got anything, from 35 years ago.
Yeah, I think the front person was Kenny.
Well, it was Kenny, but I'm not even sure if Kenny's still alive, to be perfectly honest with you. I know he went to New York probably about 25 years ago.
If we could find, if we could, and again, I don't know what the process was back when they had the PUD, but if we could get access, either Paul, you could ask, or Corey asked the town of Snowmass for any of the notes or public hearing recordings, I'd certainly be able to put some effort into listening to some of that. It's a long, brutal process. But to just see and hear what the conversations were around those times and what the notes were. Maybe I'm going in the wrong direction, but just more in the sense of making sure I understood everything around this whole place. And maybe there's a powerful argument to be made if somebody from the SKICO stood up and said, we've agreed with this. This is the HOA. We're not having jurisdiction, but we've come to this agreement on the PUD. Obviously, Corey, that's probably not binding, but it would certainly be a strong piece of evidence in front of the town to say, going back to Tom's point on sense of fairness here.
Well, yeah, I mean, the history is going to be important. To me, it's very telling that in the original phase one approval, or not even phase one, the original approval for the vehicle maintenance facility, they were given 28,850 square feet in which they were able to build, and only 2,200 of that was to be used for housing. I don't know, I wasn't there, but I have to think that somebody took into consideration the fact that a lot of that's going to be warehouse space, which is really low impact, right? It's not a lot of movement. It's not a lot of people. It's not consuming a lot of fuel. It's probably not heated. And even when they revised it in 2001, they only increased that to 6,400 square feet of residential space out of the almost 29,000 square feet. And again, I think impact had to be taken into consideration for that. And that's a huge change in character going from open warehouses to dense residential. They're not the same animal at all. And I don't think you'll find it, but I'm not saying that we shouldn't look for it, but it would be interesting to find a recording from 2001 and have that having been discussed where people talked about the impacts of housing and there were efforts made to limit that back then. That would be helpful if we turn something like that up. I'm not going to hold my breath for that, but
So how would they get around the change of character, some of the stuff in the comp plan without actually having to modify the comp plan, which, you could point to other neighborhoods. Hey guys, yep, it's us, but guess what? That's the comp plan they're moving around now.
Yeah.
That affects everybody.
Yeah.
Well, in regard, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Or is there an answer to whatever he just asked about the comp?
Not substantively. I think he's absolutely right that, and that's a point that we need to be making. What's why I don't know what the town's budget was to come up with the comp plan, but I know it was a lot. And if they're going to spend millions of dollars coming up with this comp plan, what's it worth if they're not going to follow it?
But the law requires them to follow it, no?
Well, yeah, it is, but this is, I haven't looked at this globally, but I'm sure this is zone PUD. It is a PUD, and the town council can amend the PUD.
Yeah,
I think is what it would boil down to.
I see.
John, to that end, I've thought, again, I will look for Corey or Paul or somebody to be succinct or a land developer on writing the key talking points, but it feels like both the Pines and the Two Creeks, let's say HOAs, you see where I'm going with that is like, well, if they're doing this to us, really, you might want to help us not allow them to do this to us because who knows what's next for you, kind of thing. More as a neighborhood to neighborhood, let's not let the village decide what they want to overturn each year because you never know when it's you kind of approach.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a winning argument. It's just something I wanted to throw out. And, my guess is that realistically, the town looks at this and says, I get it. It violates every urban planning principle. I get it. It ruins the views of Daly. I get it. It ruins the forest a little bit, but we need a solution. I mean, the ski co are clearly just jamming this in because they found something that they can finally do. They don't care about any of the other stuff. And let's just go do this. I'm not sure that the town's going to feel much differently about it, this location, in terms of that. And so I just wonder, even the best arguments that we make, how ultimately are they going to be effective or not? And I'm not saying you don't make them. I totally think you have to. Absolutely. But do you, that goes back to the other strategy of working with the ski co. I hear pledges of, we want to be a good neighbor. We want to work with you, so in my view, we should be able to hold her to that. Now, obviously, there's a big delta between what she thinks means and what we do. But going back to the other prong of trying to mitigate the impacts and just see how amenable she is to doing things that would go a long way to addressing the noxious issues around this thing.
Christine, can I go back to your question about whether the divide HOA should be pushing back or whether individual homeowners should?
Right.
Realizing that this is not a lawsuit, and I don't know if it ever could be. but there's something in lawsuits called standing. I'd be interested in what Paul's thoughts were relative to, who sort of has the standing, if you will, in terms of the pushback. Because it seems to me like probably it's the HOA and not individual people.
I think the individuals have, I think both have standing, but I think that the individuals have a stronger argument than the association, because you can make the argument that you're individually impacted based on your expectations. So I think that, a group of owners is a group of owners, and one unit owner is one unit owner. So everybody's got standing. I mean, collectively, you've got standing. And by the way, it's 28 days. I looked it up. After the town council would make a decision under the rule that Corey announced, it's 28 days to challenge the governmental decision. You'd have to file a lawsuit within 28 days.
Paul, if it's 28 days, is that with regards to town council making
Yeah,
the final
town
approval
council.
for PUD or not, but not the planning commission?
No,
Not
the
any of
the
steps prior
final,
to?
yeah, the final decision that would be
Okay.
reviewed.
Okay.
So do we know, when they did this plan, what was the description of the phase two? Do we have a definitive description of what at that time they had planned to do with that parcel,
Yes,
which is?
it was keeping it at 28,000 and change square feet. Snowcat and storage maintenance area of,
I'm talking about the one where they want to build the units. They have two separate ones, right? I mean, if you look at their plan, you have the one that's off to the right that has such small print I can't quite read it. That one, the one where the snowcats are and the units are, that's pretty clear because they built it. But what was the description of what they were going to do with the other one?
Are you talking with the presentation that Heather gave?
Well, they have.
Or are you saying from the original phase two plan? Or I'm not.
Yes, yeah. I'm a little confused from the standpoint that, we have this one that they built, and I'm looking at this other one that they were saying, hey, we had this original footprint. So what was the description of what they were going to eventually put there? Or is there a description?
Yeah, I think that's what was Corey sharing.
yeah, let me see if I can,
Because they have two separate, areas that they could build on.
I mean, I got the ordinance number 16, the series of 2001.
it's in there. And I don't know that they actually,
Specifically called
Followed.
it out.
yeah, the phase one, phase two, I don't know in real time how that unfolded.
Be interested to know if they had said something, oh, we're going to use this for more storage, more warehousing, back then when this was laid out.
Well, they did.
Yeah,
There was supposed to be a total of 11,000 for snowcat storage, 4,620 square feet for restaurant receiving, 6,320 feet for ski patrol, and a total of 6,400 square feet for employee housing at the end of all the development.
So that was to include art phase two. So I think it goes to Tom's original point of the way she positioned their phase two was totally bogus because they already kind of did phase two.
Right.
Well, let's just say phase two is 14,000 square feet that's left over.
right.
Only 1,600 of it was supposed to be employee housing. The rest
Correct.
is supposed to be more of the facility and maintenance storage kind of stuff. So it's completely misleading and
Yeah, they're making a huge change now, from
Yeah.
what they originally said.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like 30 times. What's 1,600, you
Yeah.
know, versus 30,000 or whatever the new thing is.
And it does say, just so you all know, not that this makes any difference, it does say in this ordinance, again, number 16, series of 2001, item number 23, the Planning Commission and Town Council shall review the amended plans in the future for the Phase 2 facility. No construction is permitted for Phase 2 without review in accordance with the applicable municipal code provisions in effect at the time application is made. So,
And it's unclear whether stuff got built, so you assume they must have submitted applications for building permits and whatnot, but we don't necessarily have that record. I know I don't have it. I don't know if you've looked at it, Paul.
I did. I think I have the minutes. Didn't I circulate the minutes?
No, I mean for when they actually constructed the buildings, when they started in phase 2 and submitted their building permit applications, were they reviewed as Deidre just read that they were supposed to be? And is there a record of that?
No, I didn't look at that, but that would be interesting to look at. All the records of the town, I think, are digital these days. So you might be able to go to the building department records online
So
and look at the application. Yeah.
as we think of next steps, I mean, who's doing this stuff? Paul or Corey? Or I mean, it's kind of urgent.
Well, we did a lot. We did a lot of it already. And John, I think you've had. Did you look at what we sent to you, John?
Yeah, Paul, I have looked at it. I mean, I've got a 5K brain in a 30 meg world, but I need to go back and making notes and stuff. But I don't have nearly the legal, sensitivities that you're going to see stuff that I'm going to gloss right by. I mean, I might trip on something and ask a stupid question, and that helps. But
Yeah. Well, I think we need like a sense of urgency, and then some of these things we talked about is like, is there anything, from digitally from the meeting in 2001 where somebody, just all those little things. I know Deidre can't go do all that.
I don't think.
I'm
I don't think
perfectly
there is
willing to
there-
help on any of that stuff. I think that's a great suggestion. So let me be clear. I'm perfectly willing to help, however.
Yeah. Thank you. But I think your point is right too. Somebody with a legal mind who's also seen it a lot is helpful to you, John,
So Paul, are you able to go back and review some of that stuff from 2001 in the building department? At the same time, I'll be sending out, I'll create some sort of memo letter to go to the association with the recording. And I'll get a date here pulled together in the next few days with the board members and you all that are available, get a date and get a Zoom meeting set up with the HOA membership.
Yeah, let me see what's out there because I've already looked, as you know, and I think that the recitals in the ordinance that you referred to are probably the breadcrumbs of the decision making and the attachments that I haven't studied other than to send them off.
Okay, so if you can go back and study those and pull up whatever information you can. Again, I will start working on a memo, get it off to the board so they can approve the verbiage in it. I'll figure out how to send the recording along with it and we'll have a date and let's get a Zoom meeting with the HOA to make sure we've got people give ownership the ability to voice their concerns, their agreement to participate, whether they want to or not. That'll be at the same time that you're pulling together all the information we can. Hopefully we can have your information by the time we have this meeting pulled together with the HOA and we might be able to have a more informative meeting with the membership. Does that sound about where we're moving?
Yeah. Yeah.
Paul, are you in town and able to do all that?
I'm going to be in San Francisco Friday night to Tuesday, and then I'll be back on Wednesday. But I might be able to do some of it from there. I don't, I've already done quite a bit of review. I don't think there's a lot left out there. I don't think there's any digital recordings and anything like that. I could take a look at the building department files. I don't think you're going to see, because virtual reality wasn't, they didn't have the technology in the early 2000s.
Mhm.
So,
Is there anybody worth connecting with Norm Perlmutter?
I could give him a call.
Are there any public meetings with the town that have already happened that we should be circulating as well?
Interestingly, the one public meeting, we were there in the audience. And it was just a casual conversation that they were going to come in.
And that was because they were referencing the Lynn Britt remodel.
Right.
And talked about how they've already satisfied their employee and housing requirements through phase 1 of the VMF. So yeah, they have had one, but I do think it's important to get this thing moving and get on top of this, because I know it would appear to me that the ski company is pushing to get this thing done quickly. And I agree with you. I believe that the ski company has had many meetings with the town prior to this. So
Deidre, is it you or who is it, just to not put it all on you, that requests immediately, I mean, like tomorrow, to be informed of all meetings?
It's just a simple letter.
Yeah, I'm just asking who's doing it.
I can do it. I did the first one with regards to Krablunik. So I think I could take that same letter and just take out Krablunik and insert ski company. And Paul, is that not as easy as it could be?
Yeah, because the statutes allow an interested citizen to request notice of meetings.
So I'll get that letter to him tomorrow.
The Open Records Act.
I thought one of the documents, maybe the PDUD from 2001, says that the first 4,200 or something square feet of the phase 1 employee housing satisfied some employee housing restriction they had for some development of Two Creeks or something.
I think it was yeah, you're right. You're right, Tom. I think it was.
So are they double counting on their phase 1? And then the other thing was there was another 683 or something that they threw in to get credit on for something to trade off to get the 43 feet instead of the 36 feet.
Right.
So I mean, again, it just sounds to me like if that's what they were saying at that public meeting, that once again they're just fabricating stuff that they shouldn't be, and we should call them on it.
Well,
And to that end, is part of that next step is writing the letter to the councilman with all of these kind of, assuming their best intent to be informed of, it feels like you don't want to, I don't know how to do it, but it feels like you don't need to be screaming and to say, here's all the things that seem inconsistent with what was agreed to that seem to be forthcoming by SKICO.
Well, and I think Corey's, started with a pretty informative letter that he gave to Tom.
Right.
Give us his permission. I say we could take that and kind of, farm it
Write
into
a cover note.
Yep, kind of farm it into our own, information coming from the HOA. And again, I think it's also critical to get as many owners individually to send letters as possible. As everybody has said, Corey and Paul and everyone, get a coalition of any neighbors that we can. Because they're right, we're going to be looked at as NIMBYism, and we want to make sure that we're coming out factually and with as much information as we can to fight this.
So can we get a list of people to write letters to?
You mean as far as you writing
where to mail them?
to council?
All the city council stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I think if we can get a meeting set with the HOA quickly and get everybody on board, I can then provide that information. That's
Mhm.
easy, not a problem.
And we can even have somebody ghostwrite the kind of letter and the issues that, and then follow it with Corey's.
Right.
I
Yep.
would also want to use perhaps, if it's, tell me, Corey or Paul, if it's correct, when we go to send, I could send the note from Corey that was so well done over down to Mr. Helm, who would share it with Mr. Eisner, just to start. I mean, is there anything wrong with letting others start to, in the world of this, be involved?
Paul?
Well, Corey, it's your memo.
I stand by the memo. It's Tom's work product. It's kind of his call whether he's okay with it being released, but I wouldn't have put it out there if I was worried about others seeing it. So I'm, from my perspective, I'm comfortable with it being circulated.
Yeah, you can do whatever you want with it. I'm just here to help, but I just want to make sure that, it's all going to get in public record. And so maybe we need to, I'm sure Corey's already done that, but scrub it for that.
Yeah, we can have Corey scrub it. We can certainly take, the idea that Corey prepared it for you. We can take just more of the informative part of it and copy that over into a memo if you're more comfortable doing it that way.
Well, probably, I think sort of the conclusory paragraphs are what you don't necessarily need to
Yeah.
disseminate.
Corey and I will volunteer to rewrite it for public consumption. How's that?
Perfect.
And I think I could also attach the video we had with the HOA, like Deidre is doing, just to share that with Mr. Helm as well.
Sure.
And again, if somebody says don't do it yet, Christine, I don't want to do things I shouldn't yet. I'm just trying to, as we think about all this stuff coming, I don't want to be talking about this in 2 weeks still, like the same stuff we did today. We need to be in action.
All board members in agreement with this?
Yes.
Yes.
The one comment I wanted to follow up on was the environmental groups. How, Corey, you had in Basalt some sense of how to get a hold of the relevant groups. How would we even go about that? By the way, I like the initial Friends of the Ditch Trail
Yeah.
as a header that you threw out. But yeah, if we wanted to start generating at least a list, not necessarily we contact them, but generate a list of the groups that might be interesting, because I agree with you. Words coming out of their mouths about being good stewards of snowmass and you're killing it would be really powerful compared to any of us.
That's just a sort of boots on the ground grassroots initiative. At the time I did that, I lived in the area and my client lived in Basalt, so he knew a lot of the players that we needed to contact already. You could look on Facebook. Is there Friends of Snowmass Wilderness already created? Is that a group on Facebook? Is hiking in the Roaring Fork Valley, is that already a group on Facebook? It probably is. I haven't searched for that. But those kind of activity groups definitely are out there. I'm sure there are mountain biking groups. Social media is a place to look for those. And then, if you find one on Facebook, say there is a hiking a Snowmass Village or the Gold Leaf 12K or whatever group on Facebook, look and see who the moderator is for that group on Facebook and find out if they're local. Does anybody know them? I mean, it's a very personal type connection that you have to make.
Why couldn't we even look at ACES that has hikes right up to the old Beaver Pond area and does the wildflower hikes right along the nature trail and the sleigh bell trail?
You just have to be careful with like a group like ACES is certainly very environmentally friendly, and I mean that is their mission. Uh, but they may also be aligned with affordable housing initiatives. Um, and so you have to be just aware of that when you're talking to people where they may come down on the issue. Um,
The Capitol Creek caucus probably be interested.
but it's uh, there. I represented a group that was friends of what was it? Friends of Maroon. Uh, there was an entrance to Aspen dispute 20 years ago. And it was people that lived on the other side of Maralt, friends of Maralt. And at that time, they were trying to put a road right through the middle of Maralt Park. And, a lot of people did not want that, even if it was going to help congestion in Aspen. That could be debated. But that was just people who lived in the neighborhood. And, like I said, they met over coffee. They said, hey, we like this park. We walk our dogs over there. We don't want this road going through the middle of it. There's historic significance at Maroon Park or at Maralt Park. What can we do? And they just pooled their money and just contested it on all fronts that they could. And so, if you could get Michael Eisner involved, that would be a good champion for your cause. I would think.
Outside, the architect kind of thing you mentioned, and John, I know you're somewhat that person. I don't know if like what we would look for in that other kind of role.
Are you asking me, Christine?
I don't know who I'm asking, but I know it came up a few times that would be the best kind of speaker. Corey, Paul,
Yeah.
John, anybody, Tom, anybody know anybody?
Well, I mentioned the Capitol Creek caucus. I don't know if anybody heard me. That's a group of
Connection to them, Paul?
huh?
Do you have a connection to them?
Well, Sue Helm, I mean, they've been very active in the past. I don't know.
Bob's wife?
Yes. I don't know
Yeah,
if it's his wife. But Sue
is that?
Helm's been around a long time.
I mean, she's a real activist.
Oh, yes, she is.
Well, that'd be great.
And you have a connection, Christine, to Mr. Helm?
Yes.
So you might start with that,
Okay.
see what their connection is to Eisner.
Yeah, they're friends. I mean, I know they do stuff all the time as far as sharing property stuff. So I know he'd reach him.
Okay, so that's a good start with that.
Okay.
Paul, if you can kind of look at the Capitol Creek caucus, I in turn will get the letter off to the town and start getting a date pulled together with the recording. It works for everyone.
Yeah. And Corey and Tom, I'm going to not reach to Helm till I have your changed modification letter, and then the video, Deidre, of our meeting, just so I'll put those together.
Right. And I mean, maybe it's a good point for me to put that information once you receive it as a part of the package with the video. So we have the membership as up to date as possible.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yep.
So as soon as we can get that information from Tom and Corey, you can go to the Helms and then the Eisners. Paul, you get to Capitol Creek. I'll get everything else pulled together with the date and we're off charging.
Yeah. And Paul, if the right end to Capitol Creek is Sue Helm, then I'll ask Bob for his help on that.
Right.
Perfect.
And folks like that have long-standing organizations and coalitions like that, they will know the others in the
Yeah.
valley.
Okay.
So they may put you on to other people to reach out to.
Tom, when are you in town again?
I'm not sure. Sometime in September.
Okay. Just thinking I'll drag you down to meet Mr. Helm. That would be good.
Oh, sure.
Okay,
Corey, in terms of just keeping this, whatever we want, somewhat confidential, one of the things, so where I was going is, do we want to the group, does it make sense to at some point set up some sort of a regular meeting just to check in? And then if we were to publish something like a list or some of this stuff, Corey, is there any way to try to protect some of that? I'm not saying that we're going to go full bore on a legal process here, but I always just, want to know best practices there.
Well, I'll defer to Paul as counsel for the association. There are certainly situations where the association can have board meetings and maintain attorney-client privilege. I think we would probably need some sort of in a formal agreement between the association and Tom and I, because I'm technically a third party. I'm not on the board. I guess Tom is not on the board. But again, I think that's more a question for Paul as counsel for the association about how best to maintain attorney-client privilege there.
Mhm.
I think overall that's going to be somewhat difficult to do because we are not one group. And Tom and I are not on the board. You all could certainly meet with Paul under the right conditions, and that would have attorney-client protection. But when you start bringing in people beyond that circle, the privilege gets broken. Any thoughts, Paul?
Yeah, well, you can easily go into executive session to confer with counsel and strategize. But I've been thinking about that, Corey, throughout the whole meeting. And I think really the discussion that we're having is what's in the public interest. What fits in, is this a piece of a puzzle that just doesn't fit in?
Right.
That there's no space for it. I mean, we're talking about all of the ramifications because it might not be in the public interest. I mean, the divide is part of the public, and the Capitol Creek area is part of the public, and what you might have is a temptation to encroach into what wilderness to solve some of these problems, which may be a mistake. Because I mean, when you go over the divide road, you're in the national forest pretty much, and you say, gee, I'm out here in the wilderness, which is one of the assets of living in Snowmass. But to see an apartment building that belongs in the middle of the city just doesn't seem right. But it may be that they could redesign it, or they're just thinking. But that's what and I mentioned this to Deidre earlier. Just doesn't seem right. If I'm on a board to have an apartment, not only that, but if it has 30 units, how many units does the divide have? 43?
41.
41.
Right.
So you got
And aren't full-time employed.
Yeah. So that, I mean, each living space is a unit, whether it's in the divide or in this building. So you're almost doubling the density. I mean, that's not really correct, but in terms of units, you're almost double. So anyway, I'll look and see what I can find. I think there is a certain amount. I mean, there's a self-interest here in this conversation, but it's also a little bit altruistic as to what fits in and what doesn't fit in.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments before we sign off?
No.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
thank you everyone for participating. Paul, get back to me with whatever you find. I'll distribute that off to the board as soon as Tom and Corey are able to revise their memo, get it back to us. That'll give Christine her ability to move forward, and I'll pull everything together on my end.
Good.
Okay,
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.